Since childhood we've been told the names of countless national heroes. But was it worth it for those heroes? That's what we'll try to understand in this video. Was it worth being called a national hero in Mexico? Today, anyone who doesn't know schools, streets, squares, monuments, and even a status in the Republic named after these so-called patriotic heroes. Well, sometimes they even associate them with characters who have nothing to do with them. But that's how the Mexican collective consciousness works. But it is true, were they heroes or villains? Would they be happy to be called heroes? The reality is that we take many things for granted without delving into their past, especially how they ended up and died. Therefore, let's take a look at the fate of some of them, starting with figures from the period commonly referred to as pre-Hispanic. There were three Mexica Tlatoanis upon whom history cast a heavy shadow. The first one was Moctezuma Xocoyotzin. His end was tragic, as he was no longer useful to Cortés or his own people. Versions diverge regarding his death. Some say Cortés killed him and threw his remains into a canal, while others claim he was stoned to death by his own people. Who killed him? We will never know, but this marked the beginning of the end of the great Tenochtitlan, although he was probably the most powerful on his time. He has since occupied a murky place in our history. Now his successor, Huitláhuac, was different from Moctezuma. He always wanted to fight the foreigners and their allies. He had the opportunity, as it was under his leadership that the famous Noche Triste, or Night of Sorrows, depending on who narrates it, took place. It might have seemed that things could be set right after that event, but it wasn't the case. He only lived as Mexica Tlatoani for 80 days, succumbing to smallpox. Lastly, I refer to Cuauhtémoc, the descending eagle. He could only defend himself against the thousands of allies who joined Cortés' cause. Gradually, they suffocate Tenochtitlan until they achieved its surrender on August 13, 1521. However, that was not its end, as for several years it served the interests of the Spaniards. It was in the year 1525, during the famous expedition to the Huerras, when Cortés decided to assassinate him. He was tried and, according to the versions known, he was hanged from a ceiba tree, thus ending his days. And so, these early national heroes met tragic fates, marking the end of the historical era that had lasted thousands of years in ancient Anáhuac. After their deaths, 300 years passed, during which new hero myths were born. Most of these heroes were Spaniards or sons of Spaniards. Examples include Hidalgo and Iturbide, both considered fathers of the nation, who descended from one of the conquerors who helped Cortés subdue Tenochtitlan. Morelos, whose baptismal record lists him as the son of Spaniards, and many others. By 1808, several criollos were dissatisfied with being seen as Spaniards' cash cow. Thanks to the Napoleonic Wars, small conspiracies began to emerge, aimed at achieving independence from the motherland and gaining access to more significant positions of power and form to autonomy that would place them above the peninsular Spaniards. The first attempts were not made by Hidalgo and his companions, but by Francisco Primo de Verdad y Ramos, born in Aguascalientes. He believed that in the absence of the Spanish king, it was necessary to establish a provisional government that would hold power for the king until his return, granting more autonomy to New Spain. This idea did not sit well with the Spaniards, and a group called the Patriots of Fernando VII arrested Primo de Verdad on September 16, 1808. While in prison, he was found dead on October 4th of that year, with various versions of his death circulating. Some claim he was found hanging from a beam, impaled on a large nail fixed to one of the cell walls, or poisoned. The true cause of his death remains uncertain. 2 years passed, and the conspiracy continued, culminating in the hasty insurrection led by Hidalgo and his companions in 1810. It is said that Hidalgo shouted "Vivas" in favor of King Fernando VII of Spain, initially fighting in his name against the pro-French Spaniards. They also railed indigenous people along the way. While there was initially little opposition, the insurgents advanced and reached the gates of New Spain's capital. However, these disorganized masses, when confronted by better prepared military groups, began losing ground gradually. This ultimately led to the downfall of Hidalgo and Allende after the loss of the Battle of Calderon Bridge. Following that defeat, which exacerbated their existing disputes, Allende arrested Hidalgo and took control. Hidalgo fled towards the United States, but along the way they were betrayed and captured. In 1811, in Chihuahua, Hidalgo, Ignacio Allende, Juan Aldama, Mariano Jimenez, and Manuel Santamaria were executed by firing squad. The server heads, along with those of Hidalgo, Allende, Aldama, and Jimenez, were sent to Guanajuato and hung on the corners of the Alhóndiga de Granaditas, where they remained for 10 years. Another hero who was executed by firing squad was Javier Mina, a Spaniard who came to these lands to support the independence movement. Similarly, in 1817, Francisco Javier Mina was executed by firing squad, accused of treason against the Spanish crown, but the executions did not end there. Several factors, including poor military decisions, internal disputes among the insurgents, and other issues, led to decline of Morelos' power and resources. He was captured while trying to protect the rearguard of the Congress of Anáhuac. Morelos, already in prison, was executed on December 22, 1815 in Ecatepec in the state of Mexico. None of them lived to see the realization of their ideals and projects, as none witnesses the consummation of independence. However, paradoxically, Agustin de Iturbide was the one who was able to achieve Mexican independence. He fought to the death against many of these insurgents, but ultimately succeeded in consummating independence, taking advantage of Spanish weakness and the fact that the interests of the Spanish in New Spain were shifting towards independence, and also considering the weariness of the people due to the war. Agustin de Iturbide managed to convince many that an independent Mexico was a viable option. He offered to place the Mexican throne under the rule of the Spanish king, or one of his relatives. He achieved what neither Hidalgo nor Morelos could. Thus, the Declaration of Independence from Mexican Empire was signed in 1821, with Iturbide proclaimed as its first emperor. However, as the saying goes, there is no worse enemy for a Mexican than another Mexican. Several who initially supported him turned their backs on him, obstructing his government. Iturbide was not a competent ruler, and for this reason he had to leave the country in 1823. Upon an attempt Spanish reconquest, Iturbide returned to Mexico from London, where he had been declared a traitor to the homeland by the Mexican Congress under penalty of death if he returned. Unaware of this, Iturbide returned and was arrested on July 14th in Soto de la Marina, where he had disembarked. He was hastily tried and executed on July 19, 1824. Another of the great independence heroes who was executed precisely for opposing Iturbide as emperor was Vicente Guerrero, along with Antonio López de Santana. Guerrero later became the president of Mexico in 1829, with Anastasio Bustamante as his vice president. However, Bustamante later turned against Guerrero's government, and he was betrayed by others. The Congress declared him unfit to govern and recognized Anastasio Bustamante as president. Guerrero fled but was captured in 1831 in the port of Acapulco. He was not allowed to defend himself and was executed in the Oaxacan town of Culiapan on February 14, 1831. In the post-independence periods, presidents came and went, and the country faced instability. Mexico indeed went through a tumultuous period of invasions, territorial losses, and political divisions. Today, we often see divisions between chairos and fifis in many parts of the country, much like the historical divide between conservatives and liberals. It was a reminder that sometimes we do not learn from history. One significant chapter in Mexican history was the French intervention, which led to the arrival of Maximilian. His clash with Suarez, whether he should rule Mexico as a foreigner or not, divided the nation. While Maximilian had good intentions on paper, he may have been naive. In the end, he was defeated and, like many before him, executed in 1867 at the Cerro de las Campanas in Querétaro. During this period, heroes emerged, such as Ignacio Zaragoza, the defender of Puebla, who on May 50, 1862, defeated the French in their first invasion attempt. Unfortunately, he died of typhoid fever months later. Another notable military figure in these wars was Porfirio Díaz, who participated in several battles in Puebla and earned the title of Hero of April 2, 1867. His military achievements contribute to Maximilian's downfall and eventually led to his presidency after defeating Suarez in elections. Suarez did not leave the presidency until his death, but Porfirio Díaz managed to achieve his goal and, like many who tasted power, did not want to relinquish it, making the start of the Porfiriato. However, nothing lasts forever, and discontentment grew, eventually triggering the Mexican Revolution. This revolution also produced heroes who are celebrated in official parades, schools, and documentaries. In reality, though, it was a brutal conflict with everyone fighting against everyone. Díaz had to go into exile, and the good he did for the country was overshadowed by the bad. His remains are in France and are unlikely to return to Mexico. Díaz's dictatorship led to more tragic deaths of national heroes. Mentioning only a few of the most famous ones, we start with the father of Mexican democracy, Francisco I. Madero, the spiritualist who found Mexico a formidable challenge. He was betrayed by the opportunist Victoriano Huerta and assassinated, along with the president José María Pino Suarez in 1913. Indeed, the portrayal of the revolutionaries as unified and harmonious is often oversimplified. After the defeat of Huerta, divisions arose between Venustiano Carranza and Alvaro Obregon on one side, and Emiliano Zapata and Francisco Villa on the other. Carranza sought to become the supreme leader of the revolution, and the failure of the Convention of Aguascalientes in 1914 further exacerbate the divisions, as mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, the apparent unity between Zapata and Villa was more evident in photographs than in reality. Each leader continued to pursue their own objectives, ultimately leading to their separate defeats. Zapata was assassinated on April 10, 1919, in an ambush at the Chinameca Hacienda in Morelos. The ambush was orchestrated by Jesús Guajardo, an officer in the Carrancista army. Villa, on the other hand, was defeated by Obregon, and although he did not die in battle like Zapata, he was also assassinated on July 20, 1923 in Parral, Chihuahua, while traveling in his car to attend a child's baptism. If you think that Carranza and Obregon had a better fate, it was not the case. Power struggles, especially with Obregon, forced Carranza to flee the capital of the country. Carranza arrived in Tlacalantongo, Puebla, and on May 21, 1920, he was assassinated in a hut. Obregon subsequently assumed the presidency, and he was re-elected for a second term. However, on July 17, 1928, Obregon was assassinated at the La Bombilla restaurant in the southern part of Mexico City. These are some of the most famous figures of the Mexican Revolution, but there are many more who played significant roles. For example, Felipe Angeles, who initially aligned with Madero and later with Villa before a falling out at the end. When he tried to escape to the United States, he was captured by Carrancista forces and executed on November 26, 1919 in Chihuahua. The treatment of these figures has varied over time and under different regiments, with some being celebrated as heroes, others ostracized and forgotten, and a few elevated to almost god-like status, depending on the prevailing political climate. But the truth is that each of them was a human being like us. They had to eat, use the restroom, and sleep. They had dreams, ambitions, vices, and flaws. But did each of them live the life they were meant to live? Did they ever think that we could see them as heroes? Would they have wanted schools, status, statues, and roads named after them? To be the face of events, march, and demonstrations? Was their deaths worthwhile when we look at the country we had today? Would they be proud of the Mexico we had today and of the present-day Mexicans? We will never know the answers. The only certainty is that we have had conflicts throughout history where we obstructed each other. And as they say in the Batman movie,
¿Mueres siendo un héroe o vives lo suficiente para volverte un villano?
so, would they have preferred to have lived longer or to die with the label of heroes that we have taken it upon ourselves to give them later on? What do you think? Would they have died applied in exchange for being national heroes?